Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones make up one of the most iconic couples in Hollywood, and at just 15 years old, the couple's daughter, Karis, has grown into the spitting image of her mother.
In the spring of 2011, one of the most recognizable women in Hollywood walked into a psychiatric facility in Connecticut and checked herself in. No statement could soften it. No carefully worded press release made it go away. The woman who had won an Oscar, a Tony, and a BAFTA, who had danced her way into the industry's highest honors and married one of its most powerful men, was asking for help with something that fame, money, and 20 years of discipline had not been able to fix. And when the news broke, the one question nobody could answer was, how long had she actually been fighting this, and what had it already cost her? The confession that changed everything. Most celebrities who check into treatment facilities do so quietly, with a cover story already prepared. Catherine Zeta-Jones didn't do it that way. In 2011, through her publicist, she confirmed that she had voluntarily admitted herself to Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut to receive treatment for bipolar II disorder. No deflection, no attempt to frame it as exhaustion or stress, just the truth, offered plainly by a woman at the peak of her public profile. The reaction from the industry was immediate and uncomfortable. There was applause from some corners, genuine and loud, but underneath that, something more guarded. In 2011, a mental health disclosure of that kind from a star of her caliber wasn't just rare, it was considered professionally risky in a way that's difficult to fully appreciate now. The unspoken rule in Hollywood had always been that you manage your private battles privately, and that admitting to a psychiatric condition was the kind of thing that could quietly close doors without anyone ever saying why. What made the disclosure more striking was the diagnosis itself. Bipolar II disorder is not what most people picture when they hear the word bipolar. It doesn't present with the dramatic swings that dominate how the condition gets depicted in films and television. The highs associated with it, known as hypomania, don't look like illness from the outside. They look like extraordinary energy, sharpened focus, creative acceleration, and a social magnetism that people around you tend to admire rather than question. The lows are the opposite, depressive episodes that arrive without clear cause and sit there, heavy and immovable, while the person inside them continues to function publicly because there is no other option. For Catherine, the diagnosis wasn't a surprise so much as a delayed explanation, a name, finally, for something she had been living inside for years without the language to describe it. The relief of that was real. So was something else, a quiet grief for the years spent managing symptoms she hadn't understood, pushing through the lows on willpower alone, mistaking the highs for just the way she was wired. Treatment at Silver Hill was not brief or simple. It involved intensive therapy, medication management, and the slow, unglamorous work of learning to recognize her own patterns. The early signals of a hypomanic episode building, the warning signs of a depressive wave approaching. Skills that required stillness and honesty in an environment built entirely around the opposite. She emerged weeks later and did something that took a different kind of nerve than checking in had. She spoke about it openly, without shame, and said directly that there was no reason to suffer in silence and no dignity in pretending. The industry that had built her legend didn't quite know what to do with that, and the story it told about what happened next was almost entirely wrong. Built from scratch, at a cost nobody saw. Before the diagnosis, before the Oscar, before Michael Douglas, there was a working-class girl from Swansea, Wales, who walked onto a community stage at 9 years old and immediately made it clear she was not going to stay in Swansea. Catherine Zeta-Jones was born in September of 1969, the middle child of a family without industry connections or financial cushion. Her father ran a candy factory. Her mother worked as a seamstress. What they had instead of access was a daughter who, from the moment she performed publicly, seemed to operate at a frequency slightly higher than everyone around her. By 15, she had left Wales entirely, relocating to London to pursue a professional stage career. That decision, made at 15 to leave her family, her friends, and everything familiar, is one that those who knew her at the time described not as recklessness, but as an almost unsettling certainty. The early years were not glamorous. Chorus lines, regional theater, cold stages in front of half-empty houses. She was overlooked, then suddenly, spectacularly seen. Her role in the British television series Darling Buds of May made her a household name in the UK almost overnight, and Hollywood came calling in the mid-90s with the same timing it always seems to produce for people it decides to want. The Mask of Zorro in 1998 announced her internationally. Entrapment followed, then Traffic, which showed something beyond the obvious, not just presence, but craft. And then in 2002, Chicago, and a performance as Velma Kelly that earned her an Academy Award and turned admiration into something closer to reverence. By every visible measure, she was the story. But those who worked closely with her during those peak years describe something that the performances and the profiles never captured. The same intensity that made her extraordinary on stage also made the space between performances extremely difficult. There were weeks of electric, almost frightening energy, 18-hour workdays that colleagues marveled at, ideas moving faster than anyone around her could keep up with. And what followed those weeks was something different. A heaviness that didn't respond to rest, to achievement, to any of the things that are supposed to help. She had no name for it yet. She only knew it kept coming back. The external pressures compounded what was already there. A stalker pursued her for years, forcing her family into a constant state of security vigilance that money could manage but never actually resolve. Tabloids dissected her appearance, her marriage, her choices, with the particular cruelty the industry reserves for women who are both beautiful and successful. She absorbed all of it and kept working because the alternative, stopping, admitting difficulty, showing anything other than composure, had never been presented to her as a real option. She was building an empire on a foundation that was already under stress. And for a long time, nobody around her, and possibly she herself, fully understood what that stress was or where it was coming from. The marriage that nobody really understood. When Catherine met Michael Douglas on the set of The Mask of Zorro in 1998, the 25-year age gap between them became the entire story as far as the press was concerned. He was 53, she was 28. A Hollywood titan with a career spanning decades and a young Welsh actress still establishing herself internationally. The tabloids treated it as a curiosity. The world watched with a mixture of fascination and skepticism and eventually decided, as the world tends to, that it worked and moved on. They married in November of 2000 in a ceremony that generated the kind of coverage usually reserved for heads of state. Their son Dylan was born that same year. Their daughter Karis arrived in 2003. From the outside, they were the golden couple, the image of a marriage that had figured out something the rest of Hollywood couldn't. What was actually happening was considerably more complicated. Behind the public image of the golden couple were two people managing levels of pressure that almost never got discussed in the same breath. Catherine's undiagnosed condition was generating cycles she couldn't explain. Michael's career and personal history carried their own weight, and the machinery of their public lives, the back-to-back filming schedules, the promotional circuits, the constant scrutiny that dissects a famous marriage in real time, created an environment that made genuine stability genuinely difficult to maintain. Then, in 2010, Michael Douglas was diagnosed with throat cancer, stage 4. The announcement was made publicly. The prognosis, at its most uncertain, was genuinely frightening, and the treatment was aggressive. Catherine stood beside him throughout, at events, in interviews, maintaining the composed and devoted presence that the public required from her, and that she delivered without visible fault. What the public couldn't see was the cost of that. Managing a serious mental health condition while simultaneously serving as the primary emotional anchor for someone fighting a life-threatening illness is not something that has a clean resolution. She was carrying both. She did it, but it accelerated something that had already been building for years. By 2013, 2 years after her first hospitalization, the strain surfaced in the only way it ever does with people who are genuinely trying to hold everything together, through absence. Catherine and Michael separated that year. The tabloids treated it as a collapse, the inevitable cracking of a myth they had always been slightly suspicious of. What was actually happening was two people, both marked by serious illness and both navigating recovery on separate timelines, recognizing that the architecture of their life together needed to change. They reconciled in 2014, not with a coordinated press statement designed to signal that the brand was intact, but quietly and privately in the way that real reconciliations happen. Those who know them describe the relationship that emerged from that period as different from what it had been before, less shaped by image, more honest, built on a shared experience of genuine fragility rather than the performance of invincibility. Something had been tested and had held, but the cost of those years and what immediately preceded the separation was a chapter in Catherine's story that the public never fully saw. The second time, and the years she disappeared. When Catherine returned to Silver Hill in 2013, the public response was noticeably different from 2011. The first hospitalization had produced applause for her courage, headlines about strength, a narrative the press found workable. The second one landed with a quieter, more uncomfortable acknowledgement. This was not a one-time crisis that had been resolved and filed away. This was her life. The condition she was managing was permanent, not episodic, and the work of managing it was going to continue indefinitely, without a moment where it could be declared finished. The years between 2013 and 2017 are the ones that the highlight reels consistently skip. She continued working, film and television projects, public appearances, the maintained function of a career, but those close to her describe something different happening underneath, a deliberate, painstaking process of identifying what made her condition worse, what environments pushed her toward a hypomanic episode, what pressures accelerated the drop into depression. The findings were specific and significant. Bipolar 2 does not respond well to irregular sleep. It does not negotiate with jet lag or with the psychological weight of being perpetually observed and publicly evaluated. The entertainment industry, by its very nature, creates exactly the conditions that make stable management of the condition most difficult. Constant travel, inconsistent schedules, the emotional demand of performance, the pressure of sustained public visibility. Catherine had been attempting to manage her condition inside that environment for years. The hospitalizations of 2011 and 2013 were in part the direct cost of that. Her answer, starting around 2016, was to restructure. She became significantly more selective about projects, more protective of her schedule, and more deliberate about the daily disciplines, therapy, medication, sleep, exercise, and the careful management of the triggers she had spent years learning to identify. The public visibility that had once been a constant diminished noticeably. Red carpet appearances became less frequent. The awards season circuit, which had once been a natural part of her professional rhythm, became something she engaged with on her own terms, rather than on the industry's. The press interpreted this as decline, a fading. The narrative that emerges when a woman in Hollywood reduces her visibility is almost always the same, that she is retreating, that the career is in its quiet, final chapters, that what the world is witnessing is the beginning of an exit. They were reading the situation almost entirely backwards. What looked like withdrawal from the outside was, for the first time in her career, a genuinely deliberate choice. She was not fading. She was, for the first time in decades, prioritizing her own stability over her own visibility. The projects she chose during this period reflected exactly that shift. Smaller in scale, more controlled in their demands, more aligned with what she actually wanted to explore creatively rather than what the market expected of someone with her profile. It wasn't the behavior of someone whose career was winding down. It was the behavior of someone who had finally stopped letting the industry set the terms. There is also something worth noting about what this kind of restructuring actually requires. Managing bipolar 2 at the level of public life she occupied isn't simply a matter of taking medication and attending therapy, though both are non-negotiable. It is a continuous act of self-awareness, running parallel to every professional obligation, every public appearance, every family commitment. It means reading your own internal state with precision and acting on what you find before anything becomes visible to the people around you. For someone whose entire career had been built on performing under pressure, learning to do the opposite, to stop, to protect, to say no, was its own kind of discipline. And the work that happened in that quieter period set up everything that came after it. What's actually happening to her right now? Here is what makes Catherine Zeta-Jones's current chapter genuinely difficult to watch. Not because it's tragic, but because of what it actually reveals about the distance between what fame looks like and what it costs. She is in her mid-50s. Her children, Dylan and Karis, are no longer children. Dylan is in his mid-20s, Karis approaching adulthood. The family structure that Catherine deliberately reorganized her career to be present for has shifted in the way that family structures do, and those who know her describe the bittersweet particular quality of that transition for a woman whose role as a mother had been, for over a decade, the most stabilizing force in her daily life. Her marriage to Michael Douglas, now more than 2 decades old, carries a texture that can only come from two people who have survived serious illness together. His cancer, her ongoing condition, the separation, the rebuilding, and still, on the other side of all of it, chosen each other. He has spoken about her publicly in recent years with an admiration that goes beyond affection. His description of her as the strongest person he knows is notable for its specific reasoning, not because she doesn't struggle, but because she never stops. That distinction between strength and the absence of struggle is one that their shared experience has clearly made very precise for him. She is still working. Her production company develops projects that interest her creatively rather than projects designed to maintain a brand or satisfy an industry's expectation of what she should be doing at this stage of her career. Her television work in recent years, Prodigal Son, National Treasure, Edge of History, has reflected a deliberate shift toward characters with real internal complexity. Roles that have nothing to do with the glamorous lead and everything to do with the kind of craft that an actress who has done genuine internal work can access in ways that purely technical performers cannot. Critics have noticed, not with the explosive fanfare of the Chicago era, but with a more considered recognition, that the work has become more interesting precisely because the performance is no longer coming from behind armor. She has also continued to speak publicly about bipolar 2 disorder in a way that has become a consistent and deliberate part of how she uses whatever platform her name still opens. Not as a past chapter that has been resolved, but as an ongoing reality she manages daily and without shame. The conversations she has engaged in with younger audiences about mental health and the importance of treatment are, by any honest measure, more significant than most of what she has filmed. She has used the specificity of her own experience, the delayed diagnosis, the years of unrecognized symptoms, the hospitalizations, the long and non-linear process of finding stability, to make those conversations concrete rather than abstract. The daily reality of her life right now is built around the disciplines that 2 hospitalizations and years of trial and error have taught her are non-negotiable. Medication, consistent sleep, regular therapy, not as crisis intervention, but as ongoing maintenance, the careful protection of the conditions that keep her stable. Bipolar 2 is a lifelong condition. There is no final chapter where it is defeated and the work ends. There are only the tools, the support structures, and the daily practice of a person who has learned at considerable cost exactly what she requires to function well. What's hard to watch is not decline. It's not tragedy in the conventional sense. It's something quieter and more honest than that. It's a woman who built one of the most recognizable careers in the history of her industry, who did it while carrying something invisible that nobody around her fully understood, who asked for help in the most public way possible and then had to do it again, who went quiet for years while the industry misread her silence as retreat, and who has arrived at her mid-50s, having built something the awards and the headlines and the red carpet appearances never actually captured. A life that is genuinely, unglamorously, consistently her own. The girl who left Swansea at 15 with nothing but certainty didn't know what she was walking into. The woman she became knows exactly what she's carrying, and she carries it every day, without performance, without resolution, and without stopping. That is what's actually happening to Catherine Zeta-Jones right now, and it's worth understanding. What do you think about what's happening to Catherine? Share with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.